everyone, I'm Gill. This is the Technophiles Newscast, and today we're talking about the DOT's new regulations and guidelines on autonomous vehicles. Even 10 years ago, we might not have thought that autonomous vehicles would be ready for the roads for 20, 30 years, but the reality is that things are happening a lot quicker than anyone expected. Tesla came out with their autopilot feature, and things kind of took off from there. Google started doing cars, Uber is doing cars, everyone's doing cars, and everyone has an autonomous vehicle that they're either building right now or plan on doing in the future. On Monday of this past week, the DOT, the Department of Transportation, released a 116-page policy guideline that outlines how autonomous vehicles should be regulated, safety inspected, etc. moving forward. The 116-page document is called the Federal Automated Vehicle Policy. The article title is quite a mouthful, but the intention, I think, is quite clear. They're realizing that automated vehicles are going to help actually bring safer roadways to America, and they want to do something about it and be proactive about that approach. The reason that the Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Association are so optimistic about AVs being safer than people is because the reality on our roadways is that there are 38,000 deaths per year. Annually, 38,000 people die while driving, and 95% of those are human error. And while software isn't perfect, it can be updated. And when it's updated, it goes out to every car in existence at the exact same moment, at least for that individual manufacturer. And with these regulations, all of these manufacturers are in compliance with each other. That means that the Audi next to your BMW knows what you're doing because they're talking to each other, or they at least are following the same guidelines on the road. And actually, this is what is outlined in a lot of this policy. It talks about safety, it talks about regulation, and it talks about making sure that the federal government and the state governments are collaborating and working together on this process. It would be very crazy to think that you were driving in Wisconsin to Illinois, and all of a sudden the car is behaving differently next to you because it is an Illinois licensed car. The government doesn't want that to happen. What they want to do is say, at the federal level, we think that things should behave like this. They want to make sure that no matter where you go in the country, things are kind of happening the same. The technology is the same, or at least the goal and vision of the safety elements are the same. The government's policies and regulations go beyond just merely safety on the road. They're also covering things like cybersecurity and information privacy, whether or not data should be recorded while they're driving, and how those things should be shared. These are all very important things considering that your car could now be hacked into and you would have no control over it. The other thing that needs to be answered is what happens when a car no longer can perform on the road? You know, if the autonomous vehicle fails, what does it do? Does it pull over? Does it go in for service? Does it report itself? All these things we need to consider moving forward. Without going into too much detail, let's just say that this is a fairly comprehensive policy that's looking at a lot of different things. It goes beyond just safety and crash ratings and things like that. It's also talking about consumer education and being aware of how these vehicles work. It's talking about kind of ethical issues. And I mean, if a car has a situation, to be very morbid here, but if it has the ability to choose between killing one person and 50 people, what should it do? I mean, these are things that we have to consider, and they are considering. One of the other large things that came out of this policy is the 5 levels of driver automation. Now, this is something that people have been talking about for a long time, but the government and other organizations have finally kind of solidified a little bit. So level 0 is no automation. This is like your 1965 car classic, right? It doesn't even have ABS. No, maybe not that far, but it's the human doing everything. They're doing all the driving, they're making all the decisions, they're maybe referencing their phone for something like GPS, but there is no control or automation that is happening at this level. Level 1 is driver assistance. This means that the car is helping you do things like accelerate, decelerate, detect things in front of you, and maybe warn you when you're leaving a lane. Level 2 is partial automation. That means things like accelerating, decelerating, staying in your lane is all handled by the AV system. When those things fail, however, the fallback is that the human needs to regain control of the vehicle, probably through some kind of warning system, also outlined in their regulations. If you want to think about it, level 2 is sort of very similar to Tesla's current autopilot feature. Level 3 is conditional automation. That means that accelerating, decelerating, lane control, all of these things are handled by the car. It also means that the environment and surroundings around it are being monitored by the car, and the car is adjusting based on them. Obviously, when these things are not working or when some detection is not possible, then a human is going to have to regain control of the vehicle. Level 3 is conditional automation. This means that things like acceleration, deceleration, lane control are obviously present. It's also aware of the surroundings around it. It knows when an object is in front of it and will react accordingly. It knows when things are on the sides, in the blind spots, and will kind of take those things into account. The reason it's not fully autonomous yet is because if those things fail, or if for some reason it deems, the system itself deems itself not able to comply in a certain zone, maybe a school zone or something like this, then the human is going to have to actually take over. So there is physically a steering wheel still in the car. Level 3 is probably similar to the Uber cars that you're now hearing about that are fully automated with a driver kind of there as backup. Level 4 is high automation. This means that the computer control is trying to do as much of the driving process as it can. I don't know if there's still a steering wheel in these kinds of cars, but presumably the cars are doing everything that they can, unless there's some crazy circumstance that they can't, in which case a driver might be able to take over. And obviously, you guessed it, level 5 is full automation. I would envision these cars don't even have a steering wheel because someone wouldn't need to drive them. They are comprehensive in all of the ways that they handle the roadway and everything that they're doing. This could be the car that takes your kids to school, so you don't have to anymore, or does some other things for you, where your presence might not necessarily be required anymore. So now that the government's defined the various levels of automation, we're kind of curious, what happens when something doesn't work? And actually, interestingly enough, the federal policy and the release of this document suggests that the government wants to actually maintain control of being able to pull things off of the roadway. If something is not in compliance, if it's not safe, if it's causing too many injuries, accidents, whatever, they want to be able to pull the plug and stop manufacturing. And that, I think, is one of the largest overarching kind of themes of this, is the safety and the control of those kinds of things. Some people might say that they want less government control in these things, but I think that if we look at all 50 states, if we look at federal highways, we look at freeways, we look at small roads, back lanes, all these different things, it's a good thing that the government is aware and caring and making sure that our vehicles are behaving well on all of them. For all of you teenagers watching this right now, this means that you might be able to leave the house at 11 p.m. and use a vehicle, because all of those crazy drivers your parents are talking about will no longer be in existence because everything will be automated. One of the largest takeaways that I have about the articles that I've been reading and the document that I've seen online is just that the government is flexible and willing to kind of recognize that this technology is coming and do their best to prepare for it. President Obama wrote a piece in the Post-Gazette where he talked about the understanding that this is going to eradicate jobs. This is going to mean that we need further education for our communities and for our drivers on the roadways about how these things are happening and all these quick changes that are taking place. It allows the government to suggest that they don't have all the answers, but they're willing to work with automakers to make sure that they can figure them out in the future as new technologies arise. It also means regulation, but it does give flexibility for innovation, which I think is one of the largest things out of this. We can't predict how our roadways are going to change once these updates take place, and we don't need to. What we need to do is be able to have a dialogue and be able to have a discussion about what's happening and realize that, yeah, maybe some policy isn't great or outdated, and rather than wait 1 year, 5 years, 10 years to make these changes, things can be quick, they can happen fast. And that's kind of the largest takeaway here, is that we're going to have safer roadways. We're going to do that through automated vehicles, and the government and technology companies should be working together to make that a reality. If we contrast these policies and guidelines with the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, it seems like the government is kind of being way more proactive and accepting of new technology. Drones have been heavily regulated, and almost it seems like the government is like scared of their impending arrival. Drones are coming. Everyone is using them. Everyone is building them. And, eventually we are going to have some very comprehensive policies on how these things should work. So hopefully the government, is watching this right now and can realize that the FAA needs to be more like the DOT. I don't know what you guys think about all of this, but please let us know in the comments below. You can also tweet us at TechnophilesPod or visit our Facebook page. We'd love to have a discussion about all of this going on. Obviously, there is a lot to process here. All right, everyone, that's all I have for this week. If you want to check out more autonomous vehicle talk, be sure to check out David's Newscast over here about Tesla 8.0 and the new updates that just came out. You can also check out our show, the Technophiles podcast. Last week we talked about the digital echo chamber. Crystal Lee hosted that. Very intense, interesting discussion about things digitally and how they resonate and the information that we see. If you guys liked what you saw here and you want to see more, throw a like down there, hit the subscribe button. We have tons and tons of videos and we're going to continue to make more and more of them. So that's all I have for this week. 谢谢大家，下次见. We'll see you next time on TPN.